Washington, D.C. was buzzing, as it always was in the Trump 2.0 era. President Donald J. Trump, freshly re-elected, had recently announced a strategic pause on tariffs imposed on select Asian imports, particularly goods from Vietnam and South Korea. The rationale: a calculated pause to restructure and renegotiate stronger trade deals, with the American economy having strengthened considerably under his second term. Economists in the administration saw it as a tactical move in a broader economic chess match. But that didn't stop former Speaker Nancy Pelosi from making her voice heard. At a swanky fundraiser in San Francisco, standing behind a crystal-clear podium before a sea of Hollywood elites and Silicon Valley donors, Pelosi smirked into the microphone. "Tariff pause? More like a pause on sanity," she quipped, earning laughs. Trump's economic team seems to think trade policy is a monopoly game. Next, he'll be handing out get-out-of-recession-free cards. The comments spread like wildfire. MSNBC looped it every half hour. Late-night comedians pounced. Social media exploded. But at the White House, Karoline Leavitt wasn't laughing. At just 30, she had become the face and the fire of the Trump administration's messaging machine. As White House press secretary, Leavitt had taken the podium by storm, combining sharp intellect with unwavering loyalty to Trump's America First vision. Her no-nonsense briefings and articulate dismantlings of opposition talking points had gained her millions of fans, and plenty of critics. This time it was personal. By the following morning, Leavitt stood at the White House press briefing room, eyes locked on the cameras. She held a sleek leather-bound folder in her hands. Pelosi's remarks were printed inside, along with detailed economic stats, historical comparisons, and Trump's trade team strategy brief. She took a breath, gave a subtle smile, and began. "Good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin today's briefing with a quick economics lesson for Speaker Pelosi," she said, lifting her eyes from the folder and straight into the cameras. Because while the speaker may still think in terms of cocktail jokes and stale talking points from the Obama era, this administration is focused on results. The press room shifted. Even CNN's Jim Acosta leaned in. Karoline continued. "The president's tariff pause is not a retreat. It's a recalibration. Since the resumption of his presidency, American manufacturing has surged by 11.3%. We've added nearly 900,000 new jobs in tech-adjacent blue-collar sectors. And unlike the chaotic mess of economic policies we inherited from Pelosi's party, we're acting with intention, not improvisation." Then she pulled the pin. Speaker Pelosi said this was like a monopoly game. Let me remind her. Under her watch, China's influence grew unchecked. America lost billions. Manufacturing moved offshore. If anyone was playing games with America's economic sovereignty, it was her. She clicked a remote. A graph appeared on the screen behind her showing the trade deficit decreasing steadily since Trump's return to office. "I don't know what Speaker Pelosi finds humorous about economic recovery," Karoline said. "But the American people aren't laughing. They're working, thriving, and building again." A murmur spread across the room. Reporters glanced at one another. The tone had shifted. She wasn't just defending policy, she was going on the offense. Fox News was already pushing the cheer-in. Leavitt blasts Pelosi, "We're not playing games." And on Twitter or X, Karoline claps back was trending within 20 minutes. Back in California, Pelosi caught the briefing on a split-screen TV. Her face tightened. "Get me on MSNBC. Tonight." But she wasn't ready for what Karoline would do next. By sunset, Pelosi was live on MSNBC, seated across from anchor Rachel Maddow. She wore her signature pastel blazer and pearl necklace, but there was a fire behind her eyes. She wasn't just reacting, she was retaliating. "Look," Pelosi began, folding her hands tightly. Karoline Leavitt is a well-rehearsed mouthpiece. She knows how to read from a teleprompter, and she certainly knows how to spin a narrative. But economic policy isn't about applause lines at press briefings. It's about understanding global trade and protecting American families. Maddow nodded. "So you're saying the administration's strategy is flawed?" Pelosi didn't miss a beat. "I'm saying it's reckless. A pause in tariffs without clarity sends a signal to our competitors that the U.S. lacks consistency. And Karoline, with all due respect, isn't qualified to lecture anyone on trade. She's a PR strategist, not a policymaker." The clip hit social media like a lightning bolt. Within an hour, liberal commentators hailed Pelosi's remarks as a mic drop. Hashtags like hashtag Pelosi pummels trended alongside memes mocking Karoline's youth and inexperience. Progressive accounts called her Barbie in a briefing room. But Karoline wasn't fazed. The next morning, she arrived at the White House with a crisp navy dress and steel in her eyes. As she prepared for her daily briefing, her team gathered around her. One aide whispered, "They're mocking your age again, saying you're not serious enough for the job." Karoline's lips curled into a half-smile. "Then let's show them how serious I can be." At the podium, the press room was more crowded than usual. Even foreign correspondents had shown up anticipating a war of words. Karoline opened with a calm, confident tone. "Before we begin today's questions, I'd like to address Speaker Pelosi's appearance on MSNBC last night. I found her remarks revealing." She flipped a page in her folder. Speaker Pelosi accused this administration of being reckless. But let's review a few facts about her own record. She pressed a button. The screen behind her flicked on. During Speaker Pelosi's tenure, the U.S. lost over 60,000 factories to overseas outsourcing. 3.2 million manufacturing jobs vanished, many of them in towns she never visited. She had the power. She had the pulpit. And she squandered both. She paused to let the data sink in. Speaker Pelosi says I'm not qualified to speak on trade. I disagree. Because unlike her, I represent a generation that has lived through the consequences of failed globalist policies. I come from a working-class family in New Hampshire. I've watched friends lose jobs to bad trade deals. So no, I may not be a career politician with donors on speed dial, but I do understand what it means when families can't pay their bills because someone in Washington, D.C. thought outsourcing was efficient. The room was silent. Pelosi may have pearls, but I have proof. Proof that this administration is restoring strength to our economy, not apologizing for it. Several reporters blinked, taken aback. Even MSNBC's White House correspondent scribbled furiously in her notepad. Then came the knockout. And as for being a PR strategist, I suppose it's true. I strategize for the American people. I promote truth. And I make sure the failed narratives of the old DC machine, of which Speaker Pelosi is a proud architect, never go unchecked again. Fox cut and live. Social media lit up. Hashtag Karoline owns it. Hashtag Pearls versus Proof. Conservative commentators cheered the moment as a generational shift, a young conservative woman standing toe-to-toe with a decades-long liberal titan and not backing down an inch. Karoline stepped down from the podium, her heels clicking confidently across the marble floor. Her comms director whispered, "That was a mic drop." Karoline turned slightly and said with a smirk, "That was just round two." The media buzz was impossible to ignore. Overnight, Karoline Leavitt had become the most talked-about political figure in America. Her firm but articulate takedown of Pelosi wasn't just a defense of the Trump administration, it was a bold shift in the political power dynamic. Tucker Carlson called her a generational voice for common-sense populism. Ben Shapiro praised her lethal command of facts and fearless rhetoric. Even some centrists admitted grudgingly that Karoline had crushed the optics war. But Pelosi wasn't done. 2 days later, she took the stage at a press conference in downtown D.C., flanked by longtime allies like Representative Adam Schiff and Senator Elizabeth Warren. It was a reunion of sorts, the old guard rallying around their matriarch. Pelosi cleared her throat and began, "We are witnessing a concerning trend in the White House, a complete disregard for diplomatic stability in favor of populist talking points designed to agitate rather than govern. The Trump administration's tariff pause is ill-conceived, and Ms. Leavitt's juvenile defense of it further undermines our credibility abroad." She turned to the cameras with a rehearsed pause. "America deserves more than Instagram influencers dressed as press secretaries." Gasps echoed across Twitter. The insult was blatant and it crossed a line. Karoline's team, watching the clip from the West Wing, was visibly irritated. But Karoline stayed calm. She stared at the screen, her jaw tight but her eyes focused. "Instagram influencer," she repeated aloud. "Okay." A few hours later, she returned to the press podium not to retaliate but to educate. Her message was crafted like a surgeon's scalpel, sharp, precise, and devastating. "Speaker Pelosi has once again confused age with wisdom," Karoline began. "She referred to me as an Instagram influencer. I thank her for the compliment. Because if using modern platforms to reach the American people directly and bypassing the traditional gatekeepers who've misled them for decades makes me an influencer, then I wear that title with pride." She moved to her next slide, a chart showing TikTok and Instagram engagement from the official White House channels since she took office. These platforms aren't toys, they are tools. Tools we're using to communicate our policies to millions of Americans who are tired of legacy media manipulation. She turned the slide. And about those tariffs. Let me remind Speaker Pelosi that when she held the gavel, she greenlit deals that favored Wall Street and gutted Main Street. In contrast, this administration has paused tariffs to renegotiate stronger bilateral terms while preserving our leverage. You don't pause a game you're losing, you pause a game you're about to win. Reporters exchanged glances. Even some liberal journalists cracked subtle smiles. The moment felt different. It wasn't a generational war anymore. It was a philosophical one. Karoline continued, Pelosi represents a political class that failed to adapt. I represent a generation that refuses to settle. She mocks, I mobilize. She clings to the past, I communicate with the future. That line alone was quoted in nearly every major outlet that night. The White House inbox was flooded with messages from small business owners and veterans thanking Karoline for standing firm. A group of Gen Z Republicans released a video saluting her with the hashtag not your grandpa's press secretary. Even Elon Musk reposted her speech with the caption, "This is how you win the narrative." As the press briefing ended, one reporter, usually critical, raised his hand. Karoline, how do you respond to those saying this feud is just political theater? She smiled warmly. Theater ends when the curtain falls. But this is reality. And in reality, working Americans deserve someone who fights for them, not someone who fights to stay relevant. The room erupted in murmurs and light claps. Pelosi's age-old political playbook had finally met its match. Within 48 hours, the fallout from Pelosi's Instagram influencer comment was coming back to bite her hard. Progressive strategists were quietly panicking. The blowback wasn't just political, it was generational. Polls from Axios and Morning Consult revealed a sharp shift. Even young Democrats found Pelosi's comments out of touch and condescending. Worse, independents, particularly suburban moms and young male voters, were beginning to describe Karoline Leavitt in one word: credible. At the Capitol, a few House Democrats tried to spin it. Representative Jamal Bowman tweeted, "The GOP using Instagram for policy PR is a joke." But the replies ratioed him into oblivion. Meanwhile, Karoline had become a force, not just in D.C., but across the country. From Texas diners to Michigan assembly lines, Americans weren't just listening to her, they were cheering for her. Not because she was perfect, but because she was clear. She spoke like she meant it and people believed her. The White House began to lean into the momentum. President Trump, whose instinct for media was as sharp as ever, held a surprise appearance in the Rose Garden. "I want to say something about our fantastic press secretary," Trump said, pointing to Karoline, who stood to the side. Smart, fearless, and classy. She stood up to Pelosi and the fake news media, and guess what? She won. Big league. Cheers erupted from the crowd of invited small business owners, veterans, and young conservative activists. Later that night, Karoline appeared on Hannity. Seated confidently under the studio lights, she was poised but relaxed. "Karoline," Sean Hannity began, "you faced an all-out attack from one of the most powerful Democrats in history. And you didn't just survive, you turned it around. What's driving you?" Karoline's smile faded into a serious expression. "What drives me, Sean, is truth. What we're witnessing right now isn't just a political spat. It's a moment where the old establishment is confronting a new era, one where being articulate and transparent matters more than having 30 years of insider connections." She leaned in slightly. Pelosi mocked the tariff pause like it was amateur hour. "But we're not operating off theory, we're operating off strategy. The pause gives us breathing room to assess, restructure, and re-engage global partners from a position of strength. That's not reckless. That's leadership." The Fox News audience ate it up. The clip garnered 3.4 million views within 24 hours and was shared by dozens of high-profile accounts, including military veterans and small-town mayors. But behind the scenes, Pelosi wasn't taking it well. In a private Zoom call with top Democratic fundraisers and strategists, she ranted, "She's getting away with it because she's media savvy. If this were 10 years ago, we'd have buried her by now." One fundraiser reportedly whispered, "Yeah, but it's not 10 years ago." The next morning, Pelosi's camp tried damage control. They released a heavily worded press statement attempting to reframe her comments. The speaker's remarks were intended to critique the administration's misuse of economic tools, not demean individuals. But it fell flat. Karoline, in a single post on X, formerly Twitter, responded with just 4 words. "Too late. We heard you." The post exploded with over 200K reposts and became a political moment in its own right. Conservatives turned it into a rallying cry. Liberals scrambled to bury it. Moderates reposted it saying this woman doesn't flinch. What had started as Pelosi's attempt to dunk on Trump's policy had now become a full-on identity crisis for the Democratic Party. The era of Pelosi's dominance had cracked not just because of age, but because of tone, arrogance, and a fundamental underestimation of the new conservative class. Karoline Leavitt had gone from being a press secretary to being a symbol, and Pelosi had handed her that moment on a silver platter. The following week, the scene was Capitol Hill, only this time Karoline wasn't behind a podium. She was sitting before the House Committee on Government Transparency and Public Communication, invited to testify about the changing landscape of political messaging in the digital era. The irony? She was sitting just 20 feet from Nancy Pelosi, who still retained a ceremonial leadership title and had insisted on attending. The committee chair, Representative Byron Donalds, welcomed Karoline with a grin. "Ms. Leavitt, we appreciate your time today. We've all seen your work, but we're especially interested in how your office communicates complex policy to a skeptical, often fragmented public. The floor is yours." Karoline nodded and began. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My goal has never been to win Twitter debates or land viral soundbites. My goal has always been to help Americans understand why the policies we pursue matter, how they impact dinner tables, gas prices, and paychecks." She held up a binder labeled Trade Reform Timeline. "When we paused tariffs, we didn't do it in confusion or retreat. We did it to recalibrate. We were seeing price pressures that needed attention. This move gave our negotiators space to press for better deals, deals that don't sell out American farmers or flood our steel markets with inferior products. It's a strategic pause, not a political gimmick." Across the aisle, Pelosi was stone-faced. But Karoline wasn't done. "The comments made about me, about my age, my appearance, even the platforms I use, weren't just attacks on me. They were attacks on an entire generation. They were a warning shot to every young American who dares to step into the arena without waiting 30 years for permission." Cameras flashed. Pens stopped scribbling. Every reporter in the room sensed the moment building. Karoline leaned forward slightly. "This isn't about me versus Speaker Pelosi. This is about the people versus the permanent class. And I intend to be a voice for the people whether I'm mocked or not." She paused, then added calmly, "especially when I'm mocked." A subtle wave of applause broke the typical congressional formality. Even some Democrats nodded with muted admiration. Later that evening, the footage aired across all networks, Fox, CNN, even MSNBC, though they did their best to cut out the most applause-heavy parts. Still, the impact was undeniable. #Voice of the People trended nationwide. That same night, a small-town business owner from Indiana posted a video on Instagram. He was standing next to a rack of American-made tools. "I've never followed politics closely," he said. "But that young woman in D.C., Karoline something, she just said what I've felt for 20 years. We don't need more politicians in pearls. We need leaders who actually give a damn." It got 500K likes in 6 hours. At the White House, President Trump called Karoline into the Oval Office the next day. "You were phenomenal," he said. "I mean it. You've done more damage to Pelosi's legacy in 1 week than I did in 4 years." Karoline smiled humbly. "Thank you, Mr. President. I just told the truth." He leaned back, grinning. "Well, keep telling it. America's listening." That weekend, Pelosi canceled a scheduled panel appearance at Harvard. Inside her office, one of her senior aides asked carefully, "Should we respond to Leavitt's committee testimony?" Pelosi didn't answer. She simply looked out the window, watching the cherry blossoms shake in the breeze. Because deep down, she knew she wasn't just losing an argument. She was watching a new era begin. And in that era, Karoline Leavitt wasn't just the messenger. She was the movement.